My name is Elton, and this is a mini-series on my channel where I'll be taking a look at artifact sets that have similar effects and uses, specifically for characters who can utilize them well, but have to go through some sort of constant debate of which one to choose. I hope to shed some light on how these sets differ and whether the trade-offs that each of them have are actually worth it, as well as how units can actually proc these effects properly. However, like always, I have to give a disclaimer. I'm not here to calculate percentages or crunch the numbers on any character's damage output. I am only here to explain how these artifacts work, how well they work in the current state of the game, and how well these effects can be taken advantage of. I am not here to shame, humiliate, or insult anyone who chooses one set over another for their builds. I also want to say that I do compile my information from the most up-to-date guides from the Keqing Main's website, as they have a plethora of very helpful information, so if you're wondering where I got all this knowledge, I got it from there. Now, with all that said and done, welcome to Artifact Antagony. Oh, if you're here watching this video, I would like to simply remind you of my previous one. This video is the second part of episode 4 of this series, and in the first part, I discussed the Animo sets and how they sized up against each other. So I recommend that you watch that part first. I'll link that in the description down below. However, today we'll be covering the Geo sets. I'm comparing the two Geo sets and how each Geo character, if and can, use them properly. And again, I've talked about these two sets in another video of mine. I'll go more in depth about how the game has actually impacted the utility of these artifacts, and how the same type of support artifact sets from Animo and Geo have had huge and drastic differences in value. So please go check out that video as well if you want more info on that, and yes, that will also be linked in the description down below. Moving on to the sets, here they are. Archaic Petra is the original Geo artifact set that gives a 15% Geo damage bonus with its 2-piece effect, while its 4-piece effect can give all party members a 35% elemental damage bonus when a crystallized shard is obtained of that specific element. This damage bonus lasts for 10 seconds, and only one type of elemental damage bonus can be received at one time. And as for Husk of Opulent Dreams, which I will now be referring to as Husk, gives a 30% increase in defense with its 2-piece effect, while its 4-piece effect increases the equipped character's defense and Geo damage bonus in stacks, with each stack giving a 6% increase in defense and Geo damage bonus. When the equipped character is on field, they will gain 1 stack when they hit an opponent with a Geo attack. This can be triggered this way every 0.3 seconds. And when the equipped character is off field, they will automatically gain a stack every 3 seconds. The max amount of stacks can be obtained are 4, and if 6 seconds pass without a stack being obtained, then the character loses 1 stack. Now, Geo has long been considered and sidelined as sort of like a pointless element. This is due to its singularity of reactions being only crystallized, and that reaction not even being good. Crystallize doesn't deal any damage, and it provides a shield that isn't really good, specifically since every Geo unit in the game has never really been that game-breaking, meta-changing, or easily flexible in teams, with the only exception being Zhongli. And that's only really due to his kit being able to grant you a near-perfect invincibility. And while the damage bonus from Archaic Petra is quite valuable, the criteria to pull it off is very annoying to do. You need to first create the shard and then obtain it with the equipped character, typically the Geo character. This becomes a 2-step process which does sound simple in theory, but ultimately takes just a little bit longer. Then you can only have one of these elemental damage bonuses at a time. And using Geo as a support element for your offense is pretty much considered a really bad option from the bottom of the barrel. And the game's response to this was to slowly and steadily build it up as a defensive cornerstone in damage, quite literally. Geo was the first element to lead the charge for a new form of meta team, the Mono Elemental teams. Mono Geo would focus on stacking on as much defense as possible in order to deal a ton of Geo damage at once, and Husk of Opulent Dreams became the frontrunner artifact to help this strategy out. With it simultaneously increasing defense and Geo damage, it soon became the staple for the units of Geo. And as I start to discuss the characters, I'll be discussing these characters in order of release to, again, showcase the type of journey that Geo has had up until now. The first Geo characters that were released were Ningguang and Noelle. These two characters ended up being what I like to think were a good sort of representation of the elements in the beginning of the game. Ningguang was a Geo catalyst that relied heavily on overwhelming her opponents with multiple hits from her unique charge attack and burst, which could actually hit for a total of 12 times when done properly. She's a main DPS unit that's pretty easy to use and can sustain herself pretty well on the field. Her main source of damage scales off of attack. one of the very few Geo units to solely do so, and because of that, Husk is definitely not the right option for this. However, a full 4 set of Archaic Petra isn't right either. Ningguang is clearly made to be a main DPS, a Geo hyper carry in fact, so sidelining her to become a support unit just really isn't worth it. However, her usage of a 2-piece of Archaic Petra, as well as any of the 18% attack sets, or no 2-piece of Noblesse, is what can help her increase her overall damage by prioritizing her stats. And as for Noelle, she was the defensive unit that everyone could reliably depend on in the beginning of the game. She could sufficiently deal enough AoE Geo damage with her burst infusion, provide a shield that could be consistent enough to get by, and was honestly a pretty decent healer. She was also the first damage dealing unit to scale off of a different stat altogether, that being defense. And while her split scaling of defense and attack was a bit jarring at first, it was soon made clear with the progressing updates to the game that Noelle could be turned into a DPS unit. However, at the time, the only Geo set was Archaic Petra, and boosting her raw Geo damage was quite difficult. But as soon as the Husk set came out, Noelle's best set was confirmed to be just that. The defense increase was perfect for her, and especially with her C6, while the 4-piece effect worked with her being an on-field DPS in Mono Geo. And then we got the Archon of Geo himself in Update 1.1. And when it came to Zhongli, he was a bit disappointing to say the least. A lot of his power and support was less useful than expected, and his kit was later buffed to be a lot better. Ever since then, he's been regarded as a very valuable unit to almost any team. This isn't because of his element, but because of his shield, which allows for perfect uptime of it while also being extremely strong, essentially rendering you almost completely invincible. This did have a bit of a snafu when Rift Town enemies were introduced, as well as their correspondent status condition, Corrosion, which acted like a poison and penetrated through shields. But despite that, his utility has yet to dip or really waver all that much since its buff kit. And as for artifact sets, his best set isn't Archaic Petra or Husk of Opulent Dreams. Right now his best support set is Tenacity of the Millilith. It works perfectly as his shield scales off of HP, which the 2-piece effect can give, while the skill can proc the 4-piece effect, increasing his own shield strength, while simultaneously increasing all party members' attack. Husk doesn't work since Zhongli doesn't have anything in his kit for defense scaling, and Archaic Petra was less useful than Tenacity. I will say that after Linny was released and subsequently brought forth the Mono Pyro teams, Zhongli would be a nice boost to his Pyro damage due to how Archaic Petra would only pretty much be buffing Pyro due to the abundance of Pyro crystallized shards created. Albedo was the next Geo character, and honestly he was in a bit of a jam upon his release. His banner was sandwiched between characters like Zhongli, who came before him, and the Liga Big 3, who came after him. And upon his release, people were pretty confused on what to do with him. His main source of damage was a skill, which scaled off of his defense, while the rest of his damage came from his attack stat. This made it pretty weird to build him, more so when there was really no true set for him at the time. The best solution at the time was sort of putting him on Tenacity so that his skill could take advantage of the 4-piece effect. However, this was still less than optimal, and until his first rerun with the debut of the Husk of Opulent Dreams set, he was just sort of stuck in this weird limbo. Husk worked perfectly for him, allowing him to benefit from the off-field usage while increasing defense and geo damage bonus for his skill. And while later on Golden Troop would overtake this by honestly not that much, Husk is still his close second best, and without a doubt better than Archaic Petra. And soon after Albedo leading the charge with Geo, getting somewhat of a buff, we were introduced to Arataki Itto, the Geo hypercarry from Mono Geo, along with his twink boyfriend, Gorou, the dedicated support. And these were the characters that Husk of Opulent Dreams were made for. Both characters utilized defense heavily in terms of how much damage they could do, and their support capabilities. And although Itto did convert attack into defense, building him for defense was more valuable to his kit. Not to mention that Itto acted as a more sustainable and powerful version of Noelle that could produce energy for himself through Ushi. I will mention that Gorou does have a unique ability to pull in crystallized shards with his burst, and this does bypass the issue of needing to pick them up manually. However, this only works every 1.5 seconds, and while it does seem feasible to work with Archaic Petra, there would still be some issues in terms of different crystallized shards being picked up at certain intervals, therefore probably messing up whatever additional damage bonuses you'd be receiving. And as for our final character, Yunjin, she actually has a bit of a fair fight, I'll tell you that. To be honest, Yunjin is meant to be on Husk in order to maximize the amount of defense she has in order to increase her bonus damage on normal attacks. Her burst works in a way where when you activate it, whatever character that deals normal attacks during its duration, it'll be buffed based off of her overall defense. However, an all-defensive main stat set of Archaic Petra is still pretty competitive with the damage bonus that it gives. And Yunjin's skill animation does allow for her to pick up the crystallized shard after creating it, through her leap and spin. But this still has inconsistencies, and Yunjin is the sort of character who wants to stay off-field as long as possible when it comes to her support role. Not to mention the issue of crystallizing the right elemental shard. With some teams this is a lot easier, such as an Itto hypercarry team where maybe the party members are Itto, Candice or Xingqiu, Yunjin, and Zhongli. The only element that would be mainly crystallized is Hydro, so that could work. But in teams like Yoimiya Vaporize, with the party members being Yoimiya, Xingqiu, Yunjin, and Zhongli, there's a very strong possibility that you might accidentally crystallize and pick up Hydro instead of Pyro. And if you're using Yunjin in a different assortment of teams, then you probably want to build her in a more generally used way instead of something that's more specific for only one sort of team. It's the mentality of casting a larger net for an overall better reward than just putting all of your eggs in one basket. And those are all the Geo characters for now. Geo is honestly such an interesting topic to discuss in the entirety of Genshin. Its simplicity yet mundaneness in what it makes is kind of sad, honestly, and it's pretty self-explanatory in its bad utility. Taking a look at Archaic Petra's Animo counterpart, aka Viridescent only needs you to swirl the elements with the Animo character on field, and then the characters have had their resistances decreased. This is a one-step process compared to Archaic Petra. Not to mention, opponents being in your way can obstruct your Geo character picking up the shard, as well as any other issues in gameplay, such as lack of stamina, efficiency, and of course the obvious, accidentally crystallizing the wrong element. With Animo, most units that would have Viridescent equipped have the ability to crowd control enemies to various degrees, like Jean who can lift up some enemies and push them in a certain direction, to Venti whose massive Storm Eye can literally pull in enemies from a great distance away. This means that swirling of elements becomes super easy, since the likelihood of missing the proc of Viridescent is trivialized for the most part. Archaic Petra is meant to be the support set in the matter, and Husk is meant to help bolster damage. However, Husk isn't as strict as it seems. While the Animo version of the set, DPC, only buff normal, charged, and plunging attacks, as well as increasing normal attack speed, Husk solely seeks to increase the amount of total defense and geo damage bonus. This means that while DPC locks itself to being used as a main DPS set for Animo main DPSs who have infused Animo attacks, Husk can allow for both Geo main DPSs and sub DPSs to benefit from the set, just as long as they scale off of defense properly. This means that while DPC locks itself to being used as a main DPS set for only main DPSs who can deal infused Animo attacks, Husk can allow for both Geo, sub DPSs, and supports to benefit from this set, just as long as they scale off of defense properly, of course. This actually makes sense as there really isn't a dedicated Animo sub DPS in the game, sort of like an Albedo Animo counterpart. And finally, the reason why I'm bringing this up is to show you why Animo is favored as a support element, and why Viridescent is just favored over Archaic Petra as a strat to increase damage. As much as this half was intended to focus on Geo sets, I cannot exclude the situation of this, because of how it already puts Geo down a few levels, due to how it has a better sibling to compare to in the matter, and I ultimately have to sum up the comparison of the two. However, this doesn't mean that Geo has to stay or will stay this way. Electro used to be in a bad situation itself up until 3.0 with the slew of new Dendro reactions, so it's still very possible that we may still see Geo's time in the spotlight. So yeah, this was Artifact Antagony, and I'm looking forward to the next episode I have for you all. I'm extremely grateful for all of you that enjoy these videos that I make, and that you're all pretty patient and extremely patient for waiting for them. My health is actually looking on the brighter side for once, so that's good, and it actually seems to be getting better. So I hope I can get these videos out to you all a lot quicker. You already know what button to press if you want to see more on a regular basis, and if you have something to say, I can only hope that it's nice. Thank you, bye!